The 2026 regulations have finally been revealed, and it seems like the pecking order could be taking a massive swing, as the momentum is likely to change to the teams that have a lot of experience in building engines. With reduced downforce, lighter and narrower challenges, are we going to see Red Bull being dethroned, and more importantly, what will racing look like? Let's start with the basics, and that's the look of the cars. This is what the fans and the experts see first, as the FIA has presented a look of the car's design and philosophy, with a lot of novelties being added to the 2026 challenges. For starters, the most important one is the reducing of downforce, and while Domenicali's original belief was that the number would be around 40%, it is now reported that the number is 30%. On top of that, the cars will be 30 kilograms lighter, 200mm shorter, and 100mm narrower, which is the primary goal of promoting closer racing. This comes at a time where the drivers have complained that the current era cars, ones that depend a lot on the producing of downforce through the floor of the car, have become way too wide and too heavy to drive, which resulted with a massive blow to the drivers' bodies when they crashed into a barrier or a wall. According to these rules, we are supposed to see drivers following each other on a much closer manner without suffering from tyre overheating that usually happens from the dirty air coming from the car ahead, which was also a target with the 2022 regulations, but did not live up to its glory and expectations. A massive change is happening in the DRS segment, or the drag reduction system, which has been used in the sport ever since 2011. The implementation of active aerodynamics on the front and rear wing will now serve as the primary way of creating a low drag mode on the car, which would be further boosted with the MG UK override system. The latter one should provide the chasing cars a bit of extra electrical energy to help them in the overtaking process, something that saw differences as big as 30 km an hour in the current era with the open DRS segment. We will see whether this new system will have a good implementation and good use, because from 2022 onwards, the power of the DRS became so strong that once it's opened, it's more or less guaranteed an overtake, unless the cars were stuck in a DRS train. Regardless, there's a lot of hype around the nimble car concept, one that includes the characteristics that we just mentioned, but a lot more as well. For example, the maximum floor width will reduce by 150mm, and although the 18-inch wheels will remain, the width of the front tyres will reduce by 25mm, and on the rear tyres they will reduce by 30mm. Safety, of course, is something that the sport is aiming for constant improvement, and in this case the front and side impact structures as well as the roll hoops will be revised, which is integral for the safety characteristics of the chassis. This is massively important because all of this should be implemented without adding weight to the car, which is again one of the most important things that the drivers and the F1 team bosses have called for in 2026. Apart from the downforce reducing of 30%, the drag of the cars should be reduced for 55%. This did raise some concerns that the cars would be drifting once the cars hit the gas pedal after the exit of a corner, but that's up to the FIA to answer if it surfaces as a legitimate issue. A huge change will be seen on the front wing of the car, with it being 100mm narrower with a 2-element active flap, and when it comes to the rear wing, a 3-element active rear wing will be adopted. What this means is that the lower beam wing will be removed and the end plates will be simplified. The aerodynamics in the 2026 cars has been heavily reworked in order to bring back the power of the cars in the hands of the drivers and not the way that the car behaves under certain conditions, which is why the team's ability to outwash the airflow and disturb the cars following them will be limited by mandated pieces of bodywork that would inwash the airflow instead. The current era's cars have complex floors that are primary contributors to the downforce of the car, and from 2026 onwards, the floors of the cars will become partially flat with neutralized power of the diffuser. This aims to reduce the ground effect and reliance of the cars on the ultra-stiff and low setups, something that we've also seen Red Bull struggle after the latest concept changes. And now we've come to the engine part, where a lot has happened behind closed curtains, and all of this prompts interesting and competitive racing. The MGU-H, or the heat unit, will be eliminated, and the power of the internal combustion engine, or the ICE, will be reduced from 550 kilowatts to 400. But not to worry, this will not hurt the overall strength of the car, as the electrification process is something that will be a lot more present from 2026 onwards. The MG UK power tends to increase from the current 120 kilowatts to 350, which is almost triple the amount of what the cars use right now. What this has prompted is a worry among the F1 teams that they might run out of battery on the long straights, which would cause them to downshift in order to generate more power, either for an overtake or a quick lap during qualifying. But this is something that the FIA has thought about as well, as the amount of energy that will be recovered under braking will be doubled, which will now result in around 8.5 megajoules of recoverable energy per lap. There is yet another mode that the drivers could use on their cars, and that is the manual override, which will taper the recovered energy deployment of a leading car after it reaches speeds of 290 km per hour. What this would do is drop to zero at 355 km per hour, and the following car will benefit from the MG UK override, providing up to 350 kilowatts. Translated to speed numbers, it should boost the car up to 337 km per hour and 0.5 megajoules of extra energy. The current split between the ICE power and the electrical power generated from the MG UK sits at 80-20, and the new regulations aim for it to be 50-50 from 2026 onwards. It is quite a controversial debate that the team principal of Red Bull, Christian Horner, labelled as a Frankenstein move compared with the experimental chassis of the cars. But it seems like the governing body has polished all of the details, so there won't be any excuses if a certain team fails to perform in the expected manner. One thing that we should not forget about while we're talking about the engine is the sustainability of the fuel, the primary reason why Honda decided to remain in the sport, and why Volkswagen let Audi and Porsche negotiate their entrance, as Audi was the only successful one so far. The 2026 engines will run on fully sustainable fuel, and apart from these companies, Ford has seen a lot of potential here, not only through this factor, but also because of the electrification of the cars taking a massive swing and having a full knock-on effect on how the teams will race from 2026 onwards. If you wonder what we should expect from this regulation change, our suggestion would be a shake-up of the entire grid, just like it happened back in 2010, 2014 and 2022. Obviously, the monotonous game of Formula 1 is something that we all have to witness, and this time the FIA has made an interesting approach. Instead of buffing certain teams' characteristics, they decided to promote closer racing and re-establish following car performance, as said by the FIA's head of aerodynamics, Jason Somerville. The primary thing that the new cars will have in this aspect is the desire for low drag of the cars, and obviously it's something that the F1 teams will love due to the fact that it's a lot more sustainable. It requires less energy and less fuel to be used, and in a combination with the narrower front wing with a distinctive new end plate arrangement, the outwash effect should be eliminated to the maximal point available. Although the leading cars love creating outwash because it disturbs the cars that are following, especially when they're stuck in a DRS train, it kills the racing factor, and it's something the FIA is looking at as the primary problem that needs to be tackled down with the new rules. On top of that, we should be paying close attention to the override function of the car, which boosts the electrical energy deployed at the end of the straights by following a car. Of course, there will be a distance that they would have to stay within in order to deploy this characteristic, and more details on this should follow in the upcoming period. But the main points are loud and clear. We will have closer racing with narrower and lighter cars, the downforce and drag will be reduced, and the DRS effect that gained more than 30 km an hour of advantage will now be in history. Of course, as with every regulation change, there is the question as to whether or not we will be able to see multiple teams fighting at the front, or will it just be a simple change of scenery when it comes to the winning driver? But that is up to the teams to answer. Right now, Red Bull are facing a big challenge because they're entering the 2026 season as rookies with their own powertrains, despite currently racing under Honda's intellectual property. But under the partnership with Ford, the Austrian squad will be looking forward to keeping the dominance on their side, which has been dubbed to transfer to teams like Ferrari and Mercedes due to their engine supremacy over the energy drink maker. With all of this, do you think that the 2026 regulations will be enough to disrupt the current domination from Red Bull? And more importantly, do you think that they will promote closer racing? Let us know in the comments below, and once you do that, make sure to click on the video that appears on your screen right now.